Hi, it's Warren Hewitt. Hope you're doing marvellously well. I'm sitting here with Joe Cozzi from Eventide. How are you, my friend?
Wonderful. Happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you. Those of you that watch our show will know that I use an H9000 pretty much every day. Insert shot of H9000. We use it, we have certain presets on there that we print through all of the time. And so when I heard about the H9000, which is like an H3000 on steroids, to say the very least.
Well, it's a few generations after that, but yes, you could.
It's quite a few generations after. However, let's be honest, the 3000 is like the famous one. I mean, I think every studio I know in LA has one of those.
Because it was so pivotal when it came out. You know, it could do things no other processors could do, and the algorithm architecture allowed for very complex processes made easy as presets and algorithms, you know, so yeah.
Fantastic. So, I'll be honest, when they told me about this and I read about it, my head went and I thought, rather than do the usual Warren review, which would be to turn it on and just go through some presets and you know, all the kind of fun stuff like that, I'd rather have you with me and go through this and really see what it could do. Because it would be far more than just scraping the surface. So,
of course. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why you're here, to help us out.
Awesome.
But give us a little bit of history of Eventide. The reason why I ask is because of my good friends Jack Douglas and Shirley Yakus, who obviously being New Yorkers and working at the record plant, the Hit Factory, and all of those other great New York studios have told me lots of stories about Eventide, about how as products were being developed, they would come down to like the record plant and go, hey, we got this new thing, like the H910, you know, in its earliest days, I remember Shelley and Jack both told me they would set a slow flange on the snare. So like a lot of those mid-70s records have this kind of like low pitch down flange on every snare hit. And then tons of other stories of the early kind of like digital sampling, I suppose. They would just take delays and then manipulate the signal and drop it back in, using tape offsets and all kinds of insanity. Stuff now that we take so much for granted in our world of DAWs, they would do using early Eventide products.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the story begins in 1971. Eventide is a brand that's pioneered many audio technologies. So we introduced the world to the first rack mount effects processor in the instant phaser, right? It used banks of all-pass networks to kind of filter audio. Sometime later, we developed the world's first digital delay, the DDL-1745, the first bucket brigade digital delay, right? Instead of shifting voltages, you're shifting samples, right? So that kind of opened up the world to more effects. People started to use this to double track, to add pre-delay, to plate reverbs to make them sound more natural.
Flanging's definitely a sort out the men from the boys. There's actually not very many good flanger plugins, let alone hardware. I don't know why people are afraid to do that. Now, you model this yourself, don't you, as a plugin?
Yeah, earlier this year we came out with Mark II emulations of our phaser and our flanger.
Great.
We even add things like age control. Reason being is when you go from one studio to another, each box sounds differently because of the aging components. So we factored that in to the experience, right? We still give you all of the control capabilities, the envelope, the external control, the onboard LFOs, etc. But this age knob is something we added to the Mark II versions of these plug-in emulations. So that makes them really special. We also introduced the world to the Omnipress.
Okay, I love this unit. If you go to a studio and they have one of these, quick question, you have a plug-in version of this?
We do.
This is an insane device. I didn't realize how good it was until I was in the studio where I saw it, and the engineer I was working with was like, no, you have to try this out.
Well, reason being, it was the first one to be able to compress and expand simultaneously.
Yep.
So a lot of people use it for interesting tricks, like the Who used it to generate reverse cymbal sounds.
Yep.
If you put vocals through it, its dynamics reversal capabilities made it sound like the vocal audio was coming at you in reverse or backwards. It was super interesting.
It's so amazing.
It introduced the world to sidechaining as well. Right?
Fantastic.
And of course, infinite compression.
See Brian, so what was he using it on?
To tweak his guitar tone in the studio. Yeah, absolutely.
Aha!
You know, and
Sold.
Absolutely. Foo Fighters engineer on the first record used it to process Dave Grohl's vocal, his lead guitar tone. Most recently, 21 Pilots engineers used it to process some drums with Omnipressor. Again, it's a very aggressive, pumping sounding compressor.
It is one of those when you're looking for something in your toolkit to just mess it up, bring in some random, create some kind of excitement. It's amazing. And when I first used it, I was like, where has this been my whole life?
So, a few years later, we introduced the world to the first multi-effects processor that had pitch shifting and delays in it, right? The H910 Harmonizer, right? So Tony Agnello's was the engineer behind this project, and its successor, the H949, added even more effects processing. So this is the first instance of reverse delays and our Eventide's ever famous micro pitch shifting, right?
Absolutely.
Which is pretty much industry standard doubling, right?
There's a setting on the 910 that Shirley would tell me about where it's kind of flicking.
Yeah.
And it just adds that sort of doubling effect that's very, very subtle.
That je ne sais quoi, right? That everybody talks about with the original unit. We also modeled that on our plugin of the H910, which you can find as a UAD plugin as well, for those of us that are into that.
Great.
But again, this processor was made famous by guys like Frank Zappa and Jimmy Page and Eddie Van Halen. The early guitar tone, that spread that he got was the micro pitch shifting process from H949. Ultimately, we would release one of the industry's most famous digital room reverbs, the SP2016. And this was a pivotal product because not only did it give you realistic sounding room reverbs in a rack mount device, but it introduced the industry to presets. Hallelujah, right? We also did a lot of research into this algorithm architecture. So it was during this time that Eventide began its legacy of giving its sound design software away for free. And if you had the adequate computing system, you could actually code your own algorithms into EEPROM chips that you could later plug into the hardware. So we're 99.98763% sure that the term plug-in software modules originated with this unit, because you were literally plugging software into the hardware. And this is the first instance of a lot of very creative effects.
It's a little bit like Bug.
Yeah. So reverse reverb around this era, time scrambling, auto panning, filtered delays, multi-tap delays. So all of these very interesting processes came about during this era, right? So yes, it was highly regarded as one of the best room reverbs of its time, made it onto countless hit records throughout the decades, but it was its capability to have this modular capability really did a lot to further effects processing in those days. And ultimately that technology would evolve into a series of processors that ultimately culminates in your beloved H9000 Ultra Harmonizer,
Many of us is beloved.
And that is the reason why these processors became so famous, because just the amount of firepower that they had.
I also feel like with the original ones like the 910 and 949 and the Instant Flange and Instant Phaser, why we like them in studios even to this day is just that tactile lean in, pull a knob. There's something beautiful about that. Now, of course, all of that processing power now can be on something, that you can fit multitudes in something like the H9000. But there is a beauty in just leaning over to a unit that only does one job, and you just turn a couple of knobs and massively change the sound. So, there is something we love about it, but here we go. This is where it gets crazy.
Ultimately, that product itself would evolve into, our previous flagship, which was the H8000 and the H7600. And, through the years, we've had so many artists and producers and engineers create presets for us and sound designers. So all of that history has made it into H9000, right? So what makes H9000 special is that there's new architecture. So once again, Eventide is kind of pushing the envelope and changing the game. It's no longer closed DSP architecture. Mm-hmm. We're using ARM chip-based digital processing. And what that means is, what that means for sound designing is there's so many more development tools out there that are available for this platform, right? ARM-based processing is what you find on our phones and our tablets. So
what does ARM stand
more
for?
Universal. ARM stands for Advanced RISC Machines. It's basically chip technology that is open to a lot more developers, development tools. So we expect some really cool, interesting effects to result from this architecture.
Wonderful.
Right? So what that means is you can take your favorite plugins and actually code them into Eventide algorithms, which is what we've done with the Instant Phaser and Instant Flanger and SP2016 reverbs. As of version 1.1 we introduced earlier this year, you have those coded as Eventide algorithms available to you in the H9000. Similarly, we've coded the H3000 micro pitch shifting algorithms and gave them to users as well on version 1.1 software. So all of the original H3000 micro pitch shift algorithms that you know and love, you can find on H9000.
Great.
So there are 4 of these ARM-based chips in there, and that allows for 16 simultaneous algorithms spread across 4 effects chains. So you can envision it like having one effects chain for the vocalist, one for the drummer, one for the guitarist, one for the keyboard player, or any combination of those. And each effects chain has an I/O of 32 ins and outs, right? So all of this means it's basically 8 times the processing power of the original H8000 flagship. Another way to look at it is you can run as many algorithms as 16 H9 max pedals, right? Which is another unique thing about H9000. It is the only device that will give you not only Instant Phaser, Instant Flanger, SP2016, H8000, DSP4000, and H3000 algorithms, but you also get all of the beloved H9 algorithms, which previously you would only find 3 of them as plugins for any of your favorite DAWs or on the pedal itself, but you have the whole collection in here now. So you have 16 in, 16 out via USB.
Yep.
You have 8 in, 8 out analog via DB25.
Nice.
So DB25 to TRS or XLR, whatever. And we molt channels 1 and 2. You have XLR ins and outs directly on the back of the unit, as well as SPDIF, 2 channels in and out, ADAT, and you have 2 channels of AES EBU in and out, right? You also have networking capabilities via Cat5, so you can use the H9000 in conjunction with our Emote software, or the H9000 also comes with a Wi-Fi antenna that you can use to create your own network and use it remotely with that.
Fantastic.
My preference is just the Cat5 cable because it's fail-safe pretty much. Right. And you also have USB ports, so you can have all of your information stored directly on the device or on a hard drive that you can take with you to any other studio that may have an H9K. We just released Dante.
Great. I was going to ask about Dante.
So each card is 32 inputs and outputs. You can have a max of 3. We are working on other platforms, but no other information that I can provide at this moment.
Great.
But yeah, that is.
Well, I know, in particular with Focusrite's, one of their strengths has been recently is moving into Dante, and all the film and TV companies I know are adopting that for obvious reasons, and Focusrite are killing it there. So that's a nice, smart thing to move into.
One of the great things about version 1.1 software now is that you can use Emote directly inside of your session. And Emote, what it is, it's control software for H9000. It gives you a bird's eye view of everything that's going on. Your input and output connections, your input and output of your effects chains, as well as how you're routing effects. Sessions is always the top level. That stores everything, your hardware input and outputs, your effects chains, your algorithms, your parameters, whereas the effects chains button shows you just a quick overview of each effects chain. So you have 4 effects chains. This one happens to have 4 algorithms in parallel. The second one has 3 algorithms in series. The third one, as you can see, has 1 algorithm in series with 2 that are in parallel. That's in series with a 4th algorithm, et cetera, right? So as you can see here, these little tabs correspond to the available inputs you have, USB, AES EBU, and analog. So in this particular session, I'm just using USB 1 and 2, even though I've instantiated all 8. What that means is, because I've instantiated these, I could just drag 3 and 4 to this algorithm, 5 and 6 to this algorithm, 7 and 8 to that algorithm, and have them on their own independent auxiliaries. But for the purposes of this particular demonstration, I'm just running 4 algorithms in parallel using channels 1 and 2, and at will, I can just engage or bypass the effects, right? If I move on to this, let's say effects chain number 3, as you can see, here I'm using interesting I/O. I'm going into the effects chain stereo, but I've got 2 algorithms that accept the stereo signal and output a quad signal. And then I'm taking those outputs into an algorithm that accepts 8 inputs and outputs 8 outputs, right? So this is an algorithm, for example, that's 8 banks of reverse delays. So very interesting. And of course, the search features of Emote make it very easy to find creative routing possibilities. 2 in, 2 out, 2 in, 8 out. You have 3 in, 4 out. And again, you can search by what kind of an instrument you're processing, or what kind of effect you're looking for, or what series of processor, for example, H8000 or H9 series processes you're looking for, and very easily search for sounds that way. So for example, if we just come here and search for Harmonizer, as you can see on the bottom here, let me just minimize that, I can grab this and simply just drop it into place, and it's going to ask me, hey, you want to load it? Yeah. And it automatically makes the connections for you.
So I have a song loaded up. Most of the time, those of you who've watched me before know that I will print a DI as well as an amp track. So the beauty of that is that we can take the DI here and try some different sounds. Now here is the shoegaze guitar. This is a preset. I decided to go for a preset and mess around. I can tell you half an hour, 45-minute, hour-long video on this is only scraping the surface. The processing power of this thing is absolutely immense. Every time we start to mess around with it, we're just blown away with just how much power. Now, it's not an inexpensive unit. That is the point. I mean, the kind of guys and girls that are going to be buying this are going to be using it in a very highly professional environment. I know that the people I know that have it are all film composers, sound designers. It's definitely a very high-end product, if you like. Now, for me, as a mixer, I think this is going to be a pretty phenomenal tool. Anyway, so what I've done, here is the DI, completely and utterly clean. It was actually originally printed with a lot of delay on it. So here's the original print. You can hear I've got a reverb going on there, I've got delay, I've got some pitch effect. I mean, there's all kinds of craziness. So on the shoegaze guitar, if I take off everything here, in fact, I'm going to leave this SRV off for the time being. So here is the This is a recreation of some classic H9000 effects. There's tons, by the way. You can just get information on anything by just hovering over it, and it will tell you what is going on here. The thing about this unit is Eventide have a massive history of multi-effects units. So not only can they create new exciting effects, etc., and obviously come up with a unit like this with an incredible amount of ability to combine effects and create new effects, they can look to their own past and do stuff. And you'll notice we were talking a bit about that at the beginning to really kind of illustrate where they're coming from. You know, an H9000 I have, as I was saying earlier, is in every studio I've ever been in, pretty much. It's an industry standard, and of course they've made many since then. An H910 is another industry standard. These are things that every mixer knows how to go across and use. If I play this again, we can go to session actually and click tempo, and we can put in a tempo. It's 119, so let's put that in. Okay, so now it's at the right tempo. Pretty amazing. So I mean, it's got very similar effects to what I was using. It's just lush. It's super lush sounding. The SRV is interesting because it's a drive control. So let's unbypass that. If you double click on it, Takes us to here. There's a lot of drive going on. Interesting effect. Obviously, I've increased or decreased the drive. I messed around with the drive here. You have the ability to mix that, blend it back in, which I actually like. I mean, that's one of the things about plugins that's revolutionized everything, hardware and everything, is the ability to be able to blend the amount of effect back in. I know that sounds really obvious if you've grown up with plugins, but it wasn't like that for years. You had units and it was basically effect on or off. You had some kind of blend control, but not in the way that you can now. God bless plugins for that ability. Let's go to our digital delay here. Let's go back to this SRV here. Actually going to bring this drive down even more. Bypass it. Like that. Blend it down. So obviously tons of fun things that we can do with guitars here. Let's try some of the other sounds that it's got. This is just presets at the moment that we're working with. In our effects change, we have shoegaze guitar. Let's go to jazz guitar. We've got 80s guitar solo and country slap guitar. Let's hear them all. So this is the jazz guitar setting. Let's have a listen. I can hear that Leslie, it's fantastic. So here's the Leslie. And mess with the spread control. That's pretty awesome. I mean, the amount of control it gives is pretty phenomenal. Here is a spring reverb. So much, I can bring the decay down. Oh, bring up the tension on the string. You can automate this. The amount of springs that there are. High and low damping, so you can basically control, narrow that reverb a little bit. Oh, the trem. Okay, so this is, you can see, this is obviously one of those plugins that the presets are all great, the combinations of stuff, you're going to bring it in here, you're going to mess around, you're going to get very inspired. So let's try out the next sound. So the next one is called 80s guitar solo. So this should be interesting. Completely the wrong part for it, but here, let's have a listen. It's insane. I'm going to go back to the SRV, which is obviously super driven. The micro pitch. This is one of my favorite things about the H9000. Let's see how this works. So I got plus and minus 9. This is going to be fantastic. So I'm loving this. I'm going to bypass the micro pitch for a second. All right, you know what I want to do? I want to stick this on the vocal. All right, so I drag and drop this down to the vocal. It should be the same settings. Let's have a listen.
I do things that take away from you. You say I'm drifting, but I'm screwed if I'm distant from you. I'm living too many lives. All these worlds don't combine. There's always one left behind. Just wrap the moon around me so with the moon I don't fade. With the moon I don't fade.
I mean, that was just completely wrong. I just took a guitar sound and just put it on there. This is the reason why we like this kind of insanity, these kinds of units, is that we can, you know, do things like this. Just take effects, put them in the wrong places, and that would work for me underneath the lead vocal. So I could take the clean lead vocal down here.
I do things that take away from you. You say I'm drifting, but I'm screwed if I'm distant from you. I'm living too many lives. All these worlds don't combine.
Totally wrong, but I love it.
I do.
I mean, that kind of insanity is what makes mixing interesting for me. Obviously, we're scraping the surface on this unit, absolutely scraping the surface. I do think that, you know, once you get into it, look, there's expansion cards, you can get even more powerful with this. It really is a mixing tool, especially for people with the time to explore and really go through this stuff. I think for film and TV work, it's going to do really well. I think it actually already does really well in that world. And, you know, anybody that is mixing a track a day on big projects with budgets, this is going to be an absolute must-have. It's really fantastic. But of course, like anything, once you've been using something like this for about 3, 4, 5, 6 months, you end up with like half a dozen, 10, 12 things that you've built yourself, sounds you've created, and they just become go-tos. The fact that I have so many things to choose from, so many sounds I can go through, so many things it's already done, it's going to be a great tool for inspiration. So it's a very exciting unit, and I look forward to playing with it more during mixing. Joe Codsey, thank you ever so much.
My pleasure. It's been I'm so happy to be here with you and impart some knowledge for everybody out there.
Well, thank you. It's a lot of fun. I think I'm going to have some fun with this, and I think I'm going to spend a lot of time tweaking and playing. Isn't that kind of what we like anyway?
Absolutely.
Marvellous. Thanks ever so much. Any comments and questions, please leave them below, and have a marvellous time recording and mixing.